One of the items that struck me strongly that has to do, I believe, here with the negotiation of meaning and with the time that's needed is the concept of wait time, which is not well understood out in the world, not even acknowledged as needed usually, especially considering the research bases of wait time and the implications. And the application of wait time is going to be of a critical need, I believe, going forward as people become reconnected synchronously.
Welcome to Endless Coffee Cup, a regular discussion of marketing news, culture, and media for our complex digital lifestyle. Join Matt Bailey as he engages in conversation to find insights beyond the latest headlines and deeper understanding for those involved in marketing. Grab a cup of coffee, have a seat, and thanks for joining.
Well, hello, dear listener, and welcome to another edition of the Endless Coffee Cup podcast. And for regular listeners, you will recognize the next guest. We had her on before and was probably one of my favorite guests, and all my guests, I love them. But Norah Jones. Norah, how are you?
Thank you. And that was quite a shout out, but I think you have mistaken me for the famous singer, my dear Matt.
No, because the famous singer cannot hold a conversation about linguistics and language and meaning. And that is what I find so attractive and so ingratiating. How's that?
How's that? That's an interesting word choice right there. I love it. Okay, I'll take it though.
That is so, to me, that is what I'm looking for. And I just find that kind of that conversation fascinating. So no, I did not confuse you with the singer, songwriter, anyone like that. You're where you're supposed to be.
Great. I feel at home with you, Matthew. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Norah. Hey, Norah, for those that may have not heard our earlier episode, could you give us a little bit of your background in why you're on this show?
Well, I absolutely adore language. And Matt Bailey, you are amazing at language under the most interesting circumstances, turning numbers into meaning. So my background is that I am an accidental educator of Spanish, French, Russian, and a variety of other things based on the fact that I just fell in love with languages and cultures when I was a kid. My dad was from Croatia as a refugee immigrant, and it kind of got into my blood. I have been an educator. I've trained educators for decades. I've written instructional materials, work with organizations to help those that are trying to understand what languages roles are in the world to become more comfortable. And I believe language, because it's the unique human experience, changes everything and can bring hope to this world. So my background, there you go.
I love it. I love it. So Norah, the reason why I have you here today is because first of all, I read an article a couple of months ago about marketing's problem with language. And as I'm reading it, I'm a cheerleader. Yes, we have a huge problem with language. And that this is an observation that I have made over the years that, especially the word engagement.
Mm-hmm.
You talk to certain people of maybe a certain age, and you talk about engagement, and we think about commitment. However, what marketing has done to this word, it now means that someone took the least trackable action online, and that is engagement. And I'm so fascinated how this word that used to mean commitment now means someone just made a passing click. And what does that do to us when meanings change over the years and become really meaningless?
What a fascinating and in-depth question. And of course, the very nature of language is to change constantly, especially those words which, like you just mentioned, are adopted by those that have an outside interest in accomplishing something. They start using shorthand. And as a result, the word is, you have presented this in a way that we might use the word degraded, certainly changed. It's inevitable that language will do that, though. So When we have the word engagement, it takes a while. Sometimes, apparently, it's true still that people do not realize that the word's concept has changed underneath, that commitment is not there. So it's interesting, Matt. What I would do is say an additional reflection is, as long as people that are in the same tribe are talking to each other and they understand what, in this case, say, engagement means, it's a click, then we're safe. The problem becomes if people are not reflecting on the fact that they're using tribal speak and that not everyone outside of their tribe understands what engagement means, which is something that every group, no matter what their role, be it in marketing or anything else, can take care of by sitting back and saying, is this the understanding of the word out there in the big world? And are we handicapping ourselves, wounding ourselves if we don't realize what the meaning is?
So you have, okay, your solution, and I love how you tackled that of if it's within my community that we have this shared meaning, then we're good. Here's the problem. So in my training, and as you know, I train marketers in data and analytics. I've been instituting a poll at the beginning of every course. And this poll now asks people, and many of them are in the same organizations.
Okay.
How do you define an impression? Or how do you define a view? Now, in marketing, this is, I would say it's your top level metric that if you're doing an ad campaign, if you're trying to see how many people have seen your ad, you're measuring impressions or views. And I am amazed that even within organizations, there's so many different definitions that people would, and I give them 5 options to go for. And we'll have an even distribution of the answers.
Ouch.
And now what I find very interesting is the vast majority of people define an impression in what I would call a human concept. That I saw the ad, therefore that's an ad view or an impression.
Interesting.
Now, what I then bring in is, now, how many of you are advertising on Facebook or Instagram? Because Facebook defines an ad view as anything larger than 0 pixels that was displayed for anything more than 0 seconds.
Oh my! Wow,
Yeah,
that's a
exactly.
fairly low definition of view.
Yeah, right. And so here's the problem, that even within the community, we have many different opinions or understandings of what this could mean, but we're paying a third party with their own definition that is more restrictive and specific than anyone else guesses.
Wow, that's an interesting point. Indeed, you don't have the time or the system to have double checked against what your assumptions are, even inside the tribe's definition. If we continue that, wow, that's heavy.
Absolutely. And so it comes down, and this is something that you actually, in one of our email exchanges, you brought this up, and I thought it was so fascinating. Negotiation of meaning. And that right there struck me, because within these marketing communities, tribes, whatever we want to call them, we don't negotiate meaning.
Mm-hmm.
We don't sit around and ask, what does this mean? And how do we define it for the organization? And the longer that goes on, the more dangerous it's going to be for these agencies or companies that don't have that shared definition.
Absolutely right. Matt, you have tapped on what in language education, and it's useful in thinking in the business world, no question. In the trainings that I've done for business folks, they have resonated well with this. And so here it comes. And that is, there are basically 3 modes of communication. The receptive mode, what we would call the interpretive mode, where people are reading, listening, watching something. And then there is the interpersonal mode, and I'll shift that for just a sec to the third, which is the presentational mode, which is through writing or speaking or video, for example, that a message is conveyed. In the first two, the recipient or the presenter is throwing things out in the world, whether or not anyone is actually understanding it. Whereas in the middle one, the interpersonal, which can be in writing, can be in speech, the alive nature of it means that that's negotiation of meaning time. This is where people say something where the collapse happens in front of one, if you will, or at least the stumble. And we are able then to say, well, what I mean by that is, and come to a conclusion. And clearly, this is a very difficult thing to do under normal circumstances. It takes time, and it also means that people have to be aware of the negotiation as part of one of the most important parts of this second of these three modes. And it's very challenging when you come down to where people are very busy and trying to rush on to the next thing, but critical in order to make sure that what one's doing is effective.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I remember when, so now I'm going to bring in my educational experience. When I was working on my master's degree, it was all an asynchronous experience.
Mm-hmm.
And so there were no live lectures, there were no live discussions. But what I found interesting is what drove us to have synchronous meetups. What drove us to contact one another and have discussions were unclear instructions.
Oh.
What does this mean? And so by getting other people, and what we were doing was negotiating that meaning from the instructions of the assignment so that I guess the way I justified it was, if I'm going to do this wrong, 4 other people are going to do it the wrong way as well.
Exactly right.
So,
But misery loves company.
That's
and
right.
Yes, exactly. Brilliant. Well, Matt, it's really interesting because, again, with the negotiation of meaning, there's so many levels of this. You guys were together there in a course, and you needed to know what the instructions were that you were all experiencing at the same time. I think especially challenging in the marketing world, business world, is that we are throwing messages forward, or instructions, if you will, however you'd like to define it, to folks who have potentially a very large difference of personal experiences, their lives, their cultural backgrounds, potentially their language backgrounds. And the negotiation of meaning then becomes even more critical, as well as more detailed in that case.
Absolutely. And that's something where a couple months ago, we had a podcast on multiculturalism and the importance of understanding how some of these messages, because of the experience, we may be isolating a group in our messaging rather than expanding that group, expanding that message to be more inclusive, to be more understanding. And how many times that when that emphasis is made to be more inclusive, it creates a much stronger and more effective message.
It certainly does. And Matt, I've been thinking about always, as I work with items, as I've told you in email exchanges and conversations, that you are on my mind a lot. And one of the items that struck me strongly that has to do, I believe, here with the negotiation of meaning and with the time that's needed is the concept of wait time, which is not well understood out in the world, not even acknowledged as needed usually, especially considering the research bases of wait time and the implications. And the application of wait time is going to be of a critical need, I believe, going forward as people become reconnected synchronously and are trying to avoid falling into a ditch on their way to understanding each other. And wait time can solve that problem.
So I'm going to ask you, Norah, could you define wait time for us?
Absolutely. I figured you should ask that, right? Wait time is the time that lapses in 3 steps. The first of the steps is, if I ask a question, how much time do I give before I call on someone or expect an answer. Wait time 1, then with the number in it, is the amount of time that the questioner leaves after the person has answered before they begin some kind of response. And then if the response, after the response is made, do they leave any more time, which would be wait time 2, for follow-up? And what is interesting is that the research shows that the wait time after the person asks a question before they call on someone or expect an answer is about 2 seconds.
Mm-hmm.
After the person responds, the wait time 1 for most folks is 0.9 second. In other words, almost immediately. And it should be 3 to 5 seconds. And then what we really should be talking about is what kind of response also comes from the person, and what are the implications for the way that the individual works, the individual understands, and the group understands. And this is where I'm especially feeling like we have a strong need to learn, grow, understand, because that part of and the empowering of the individual and the group follows from a research-based approach to using wait time.
Wow, that is such an interesting study of communication and human behavior. And again, I'm bringing in my business and marketing experience of in meetings. I've brought this up before. The last thing anyone wants is a question. If someone's making a presentation, they don't want any questions, because I think as soon as someone brings up a question, there's resistance. There's immediately there is tension if there is a question, because sometimes I'm questioning, where did the data come from? How did you get to this conclusion? And sometimes what we're asking is just, what was your path to get to this conclusion?
Right.
However, in a business context, sometimes those questions are taken too, I would say, too personally, and it becomes you're attacking me rather than, and there's some misunderstanding there. But also in that presentation, I find that many don't leave space for questions. They don't
Yes.
want them. They're trying to remove that time for questions. And I've seen many speakers of, okay, any questions? Nope, good. Let's move on.
We're out of
And
here.
I have found out, and it's funny because I didn't even know about this. This is what I love about education, is there's these models and research that I've never known about, but I've learned that, especially when I'm teaching, if I leave like a 5-second gap after asking a question, it becomes very uncomfortable.
Uh-huh.
People don't like that.
They have to be trained. You're so right, Matt. You're so right.
You could see people physically shift and move the longer nothing is said after that question. And it's such an uncomfortable moment.
It is. And the thing, what I love about what you do is you do that action research. You just have an intrinsic skill that way, that it's just admirable. When I was working with my action research after a 3-year program that I would back, in the 1980s and 90s from the Appalachian Educational Laboratory, what I found was I truly did have to train students or those up to whom I was presenting to understand that I was pausing even in the way my face responded to the question, even in the way that my body posture was in front of them. Because what we do, what you have discovered there with that discomfort, is folks are used to receiving affirmation from the authority figure. And the training to say, I'm stand still, while you think about your answer, it doesn't mean that it was either correct or incorrect, or insightful or goofy. It means only that we're waiting to see if you have something else to say, and I'm giving group work, where the business growth, where organizational growth comes in, as well as individual growth, is while your compatriots think. Now, in a classroom skill set building area, and this will be interesting to see if this relates well to what you have already done, Matt, or might consider doing, is then I will then ask the peers in the room, what did you think of the answer? Calling on individuals as necessary based on what kind of a group it is, or allowing for volunteers. This way, everyone has had a chance to think about the same question that was asked that individual proceeded to respond to or provide input. Everybody gets a chance to play. Everybody gets a chance to express their understanding, their background. So in a way, a very real way, everyone is learning from that one question in a way that multiple questions put out and quickly responded to by the leader cannot do. And on top of it, as a manager, as a leader, as a presenter, you're learning something about the skill set, understanding, background of those that are in front of you. So without having to ask any more questions, you already have a better idea of what everyone already knows or
Absolutely.
could know.
Yeah, especially when I'm doing a business training and I know there are managers in the room, and I love it when the management is involved in the training. And I'm sure you've experienced this as well. I've had some managers, they make the introduction, camera goes off, and everything. We've all done virtual over the past 2 years.
Yes.
They make the introduction, camera goes off, and immediately that tells me what kind of manager they are.
Yeah.
And if the camera goes off and they disconnect, they're gone. Again, we have 3 hours ahead of us, and you just told me what kind of culture you have. Because,
Amen.
yeah,
Amen.
you introduced it and you're out of here. When I have managers that not only make the introduction, but the camera stays on, they're engaged through the meeting, and then and they interrupt me, which I have no problem with. And when they
Perfect.
say, and I love it. I mean, these are my favorite trainings when they interrupt and say, Matt, that was great. How do we apply this to what we're doing right now? And what they've done now is something that I couldn't do.
Yeah.
Because if I said that, I'm going to get blank stares. They're saying it, and they're bringing that in. And also when they respond to what others have said. Now, what I get to do at that point as an educator, I hear the internal conversation. I hear what they're dealing with. I hear
Yes.
some of the more context of what's going on, and that gives me more information so that an hour from now, when I deal with something again that hits that, I can bring that conversation up. And now, again, we have more shared meaning because now I'm teaching from an understanding of one of the issues you're facing. So it helps me be a better educator and connect these things better because there was an engaged manager that
Yes.
was making this meeting active and actively participating to make it more effective for their team.
Beautiful. And we go right back to your original phrase that you brought back. That is part of the negotiation of meaning. Negotiation of meaning in words is what we often refer to and where we started. But that's the most important, but it's base, foundational negotiation. Negotiation of meaning of what's important. Negotiation of meaning of who gets to play. Negotiation of meaning of who gets to grow. Negotiation of meaning of who's part of the group and who's left out, of where people are headed and where they may not be headed, what you as the trainer can bring and where the blockages might be or the opportunities can be. All of those things are part of the negotiation of meaning that can only come through waiting for just a moment, for listening, at least for that. When you were working with your compatriots in that course to discover what it was that those instructions were trying to say, doggone it, you were in fact providing an opportunity for you to wait together until you arrived at an understanding. And it happens at every level, linguistic, meta-linguistic, cultural, behavioral, all of them.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Nora, you'll find this funny because the course we were working on was creating instructions for an online
No,
course.
ironic, Matthew. That will not work. That's great, Matt. That's great. Thanks
Oh,
for sharing that. That is ironic. I will continue to laugh about this well past
oh
this
yeah,
podcast, I assure you.
absolutely. We'll circle back out here because when you were talking about, again, the negotiation of meaning, one of the things that really struck me is when you said negotiating what's important, negotiating expectations. Now, that gets back to, I think, my manager, and especially in that business context, but I'm sure you've seen it in educational as well. What's our goal? What are we trying to accomplish?
Yeah.
And is that effectively communicated to the rest of the team? Because in a business context, when I'm teaching data, one of the things that people constantly say is there's so much data, there's so much information, I don't know what's important.
Yes.
And
good
so as a
point.
result, they take everything that they can find and they dump it all on a report. And so
Mhm.
that's where, when you said that,
Yeah.
that negotiation meeting, that is a manager's responsibility to set the expectation of this is what's important, meaning this is what's not important. This is what we don't need to see. And
Yeah.
this is what we want to see. And that helps sets the tone.
That's huge, Matt. And that indeed is. There's so much, as a Gallup coach, we talk all the time about it's the manager, it's the book, it's everything with regard to the manager being aware of what the point is, where everybody wants to go, and staying aware of that, staying in touch with that. Do you find that in your work that most managers are able to step up to that kind of plate?
As a regular listener of the Endless Coffee Cup, you know that I am passionate about learning and teaching others. With that, I've launched my own education portal for marketing professionals. It's at learn.sitelogic.com. I'm creating and launching a series of courses on analytics. First course is how to create an analytics strategy that aligns to your business objectives. The second course is 6 analytics skills that turn data into insights. The third course, launching in just a few weeks, is how to eliminate data overload and improve your presentations. This final course teaches you how to speak the language of the C-suite in your presentations, making you more persuasive, powerful, and effective in your marketing role. You'll also find short topics on data, Google algorithms, and local SEO. And finally, the centerpiece is the OMCA certification course. This is a 40-hour coached course that provides you with a solid digital marketing foundation. At the successful conclusion of this course, you are eligible to sit for the OMCA exam, and you'll receive a free voucher for the exam, a $225 value that is included with your course enrollment. I'm an advocate of the OMCA certification, as OMCA certified marketers make 16 to 25% more than their non-certified coworkers. The OMCA is proof of your skills and knowledge in this industry. Go to learn.sitelogic.com right now to accelerate your marketing career. I think honestly, I'm one of these people that think that we needed this, especially in this culture where it's that get more done, the more meetings means I'm more productive type of mentality. I think with more people working from home, do you think that has created more reflection time of what am I doing? And why am I running this rat race? And maybe this leads to, what they're calling the great resignation
Nation.
of people are actually taking the time to sit and reflect, which wasn't happening prior to work from home, prior to lockdowns, prior to distancing. Do you see any of that playing into this?
Absolutely. I mean, what you've just described right there, Matt, is negotiation and renegotiation of meaning, sitting on the sofa drinking the endless cup of coffee, as it were. Absolutely true. And let's think about what it is implied with regard to healthy organizations or organizations where managers are willing to and need understand that they need to stay open to change. They have begun already to accept that this negotiation of meaning in the way we work, in the results we look for, in the matrix of what it is that is important to the organization. All of these things have been up for grabs, at least a little bit. And look at unhealthy organizations, ones in which only the previous approach can work. There's no negotiation because there's been the background of, and like we were talking about the modes of communication at the beginning, of presenting. Here's how we work. Now here's what you'll give me. And yes, I believe the pandemic has provided a clear option for people to sit back and say, I'm going to take some time because I'm not being rushed in a location. I can't be on the, well, I guess it's possible to be on the phone for 8 hours a day. However, I'm usually not. And I'm going to think about it. And those that are able to, those organizations and businesses that are able to respond to this negotiation of meaning are going to prosper. And when we take a look at the coaching world, some of the coaching leaders have been very specific. The world has changed irrevocably. And this is a huge part of it. People realize they have agency, they have power.
Hmm. Yeah, I think part of that has also led to more of a slowdown as well in getting back to that wait time
Hmm.
that I would hear stories from people that they would get an email from work or a coworker, and then 5 minutes later, another email. Why haven't you answered yet?
Yes.
And that,
Devastating.
yes,
Devastating.
yes. And so, not just even in a presentation format, but in a business context, that if you're asking people questions but not giving them time to formulate an answer, and even some of the questions that I've seen being asked and with a demand for an immediate response, that I can't give you an immediate response
Hmm.
at the level that you are asking for. And I'm not sure many people understand that. They need that answer right away, but when it requires analysis, it requires reflection in order to properly respond. That's a boundary that I created for myself when I had my own business, that just because you sent me an email does not mean I'm going to respond. I need, and I would set up kind of a mental, I need 2 hours to respond to
Hmm.
that. And so I
Hmm.
need to budget that time, and then I'll give you the information you need, and it will be a quality response.
Well, Matt, you've addressed some aspects of language in general and language as it's used in marketing and in business, which is that their language can be degraded. We talk about that a lot in literature, articles that's out and about, books, media, with regard to the way that people talk to each other in, say, a political realm. But that degradation is really what you have described right there. Speed can degrade the experience of language. Hurry up now, hurry up, hurry up, hurry up. We recognize in our family lives, we recognize in lives of friendship. Friends do not hustle each other down the road. Part of the definition of a relationship is taking the time so that the language that we speak to each other is calibrated to achieve the effect. Sometimes the effect is simply to remain good friends and not to pass on information. And that is true of all human groupings. And marketing in particular, Matt, is a science of reaching out to touch people's lives with meaning What is the meaning of what I look at? Why would I engage with what you're showing me? What will keep me wanting to see more and hear more? And being rushed along is not going to do it. And it's fascinating because if the metrics that are available say 0 time is fine, then the definition of, in my opinion, the definition of the group that's working with those has to say not in hours, and we'll need to adjust and see and use more analysis. I don't know like you do how one gets inside those figures and those digital histories, but to be aware of the time factor and the development of the relationship is key.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I love what you said, that speed can degrade meaning. That is so powerful because I have seen that in so many organizations where the emphasis is on speed and it's not on meaning.
Mm,
Speed to get me that report, speed to get this, complete this, speed to, whereas the emphasis was not on what does it mean? And let's take the time to think through, work through, develop this. Wow, that was so foundational. I'm going to rewind. I'm going to get that clip because I've got it highlighted in my notes because that is so powerful.
but thank you, Matt, for that response to it. It's very, very encouraging. And one of the things that I think that has to do with bringing up, as you did, about the great resignation is the effect of, or I should say, on a person that is working when they recognize that the hurry up is the only reason for their work, that the meaning is not the value in what they're about to produce. Now, for some things, we just get it done and we get it over. But over and over again, if one's work is considered to be simply that which must be done quickly,
Mm,
and we feel that potentially that work is going to be put to one side again and again and again because we know that we have not created value in the information that's been provided within the time frame we've been given, that the person sits back again in their cramped apartment, looks out the window and says, why am I doing this? I know what I want to say, but the person is not listening. And that is the definition of a presentation mode into the abyss,
mm,
not a conversation.
absolutely. That is so, so powerful. Wow. And it goes right along with, my emphasis when teaching how to present is you are the star.
Yes,
You're the one doing the analysis. You're the one who found the connection. Now you have to communicate it. And simply putting together a presentation very quickly and throwing a bunch of charts and graphs is not going to highlight your intelligence. And
absolutely.
oh, this so yeah, what's flooding into my head right now is the basics of communication, that there's data, there is an encoder, and the data has to be transmitted and decoded. And this is what I get such a thrill about data, is the data is already encoded. You need to decode it and
Yeah,
put it into a logical message. And then the delivery is in itself an encoding and decoding as well.
beautifully
And
said.
yeah,
Beautifully said.
and so if my audience is focused on the financial impact of a recommendation, then I need to present it in terms of a financial impact. If I present it in terms of here's something that happened in this campaign, and here's all the charts and graphs and data, and I'm using terms that have no clear definition or are subjective, then I'm not speaking the language of my receiver, of my audience. And the message just disappears into the ether, as you had said before.
It does indeed. And that's beautifully said. And the thing is, you are talking about business, but it's at every single level. And people can get this if they reflect for just a moment about the nature of how they speak to a person that's hurting, how they speak to a person that's curious, how they speak to a person that's afraid. And I would venture to say that, especially speaking to groups where there's a lot of pressure to make money, to make sales, to make a good product, to make an effective world, that people come in with a low grade fear.
Mm. Oh, yeah.
And
Yeah.
part of the power of a high quality use of language and presentations, trainings, and the kinds of things you're talking about, the interpretation of the audience, is to say, you are safe. And part of that, and this is something I know that you've done with your trainings, is part of it is to be able to be vulnerable in front of people yourself. If it's digital, that's done through the use of the face and the voice and timing and a variety of metalinguistic behaviors. If you're in front of people, something simple like keeping the chest open and so forth, but allowing people to understand that you are trusting them and that they can trust you, and now they can relax and listen
Mm.
and interact.
Yeah, I think I'm going to get into a larger discussion here. I think we have lost teaching communication. And it's one thing I watch very closely, with my daughters and their school is, again, what modes are they delivering their homework? How much of
Mm.
it is speaking? How much of it is presentation? I just feel as though, especially marketers, I can see the lack of communication skills,
Wow.
which to me, you're in marketing. This is part of what it entails, but I think because of the emphasis on digital over the past 20 years, we focused more and more on here's this external digital world that you need to be able to play in, but we're not emphasizing the one-on-one communication skills that make you effective in your role. And is this something in education that seems, I'm asking you as an educator, is this being diminished? Are we not focusing as much on interpersonal or one-on-one or one-to-many communication skills?
It's an excellent question, and you are not the only business person with regard to the folks that I've talked about with my podcast, It's About Language podcast, that has said that the number one need is communication. And I have actually asked, as well as reflected, over this last year and a half, specific to this question about to leaders of education, what is the role of training students, scaffolded, careful, research-based communication training, especially spoken training in this world of digital disappearance? And it's a mixed bag. There are, of course, as one can imagine, amazing educators whose emphasis on the verbal communication is very high. The training is there, the consistent desire for students to express themselves clearly in presentation mode and the conversations that they engage with. But Frank, especially with the kind of stresses and strains that have happened over the period that we have been working with the pandemic, this difficult already art has been made even more difficult for those who may not have themselves the background of it. As a matter of fact, I think that as a parent as well as a person in society, you would know that we kind of throw up our hands every once in a while and say, can they communicate at all? And the stories of young people that are literally still glued to their phone while they're back at the classroom, not able even to respond to the question, to a comment or a call of their name, means that we're back to climbing a mountain on this one. I know that educators understand the importance of this communication. The question remains always, what time? Here we go again. What time are we giving educators to be able to spend on the person-to-person experience that is not the same thing as memorizing particular formulas or particular dates or particular types of information? What are we discerning as a country about what we want as outcomes? And just to finish this thought, Matt, because I believe it's critical, is that those that have said and that I have interviewed in my podcast or that I have talked to on the side that have said, of all the things I want someone that can write clearly and present clearly,
Yep.
and the rest I can train, that there is missing that which I was kind of alluding to when I was talking about my own classroom experience. Namely, I don't cover as many minuscule details that are going to be forgotten anyway, frankly. And I rushed past that because it's true.
Mm-hmm.
But what we did is we communicated and developed the confidence to stand in front of the individual on a camera or the group in real life and to communicate clearly. It's a mixed bag, but I know we're going to need it more than ever in the world that we are coming into now.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And, in a way, I can see where, this has been good. Part of my family are introverts. They love this. They love being in front of a camera and being able to turn off the camera when they're not comfortable. And so it's a whole new way of working, especially
Yes,
with this. But at the same time, you can be an introvert, but still have a commanding presence when you speak.
absolutely. It's not extroversion or introversion. It's the focus on what the audience is, to come back to your point. And I had not thought about it, but what you just said has tapped on something I'm looking forward to following up, which is, are the ways that we are now using digital communication to connect by requirement of all of the things that we've been facing over these last couple of years, will this provide new breakthrough for all kinds of speakers? We've been so much relegated to the face-to-face, which suits for students and which you can train most people to do pretty well. But potentially we've opened up, just like we've opened up access for people that have had trouble physically to get to locations. Digital has opened up their access. Potentially we've opened up access for those who feel that they are stumbling in the face-to-face world, but can present beautifully in the digital world. It's be interesting to watch that unfold.
Absolutely. And it's because, I something we deal with here in the family. And it's the joke that, dad's the communicator. And yeah, I can stand in front of a camera and I can fill 4 hours and still try and squeeze, things in at the end. But what I realize is there are people that they need to sit through that training of 3 hours and they won't have anything to contribute until 2 hours after it's done because they need that more reflection time. And honestly, I that has been one of the things I've had to force myself into is taking more reflection time rather than feeling like I need to speak up and say something is let's just be quiet and think about it for a while. So we also need this to happen the other way. Yes, you're extroverts. You're comfortable in front of the camera. You need to take some and give more wait time for others because
Yes.
we all process at different speeds. We process different things differently. And I think that's one thing that a manager can do, especially in work, is let's not get all the questions at the end of the meeting. Okay, tomorrow let's regroup and let's talk about what we just did today. Giving others in your team more space to formulate their question or formulate their observation rather than immediately, here's our course of action, let's go. And now I've excluded maybe half of my team from being able to contribute.
Plan in that time. That's an absolutely beautiful reflection there, Matt. And while this is more on the personal development level, an extrovert is a person or I should say maybe a good presenter, because again, introverts can be good presenters as well. It's just that they may get more tired out from it after a while. But the person that is very verbal, that can enjoy talking for 4 hours straight, learns by reflection and question and an opportunity for others that they themselves may have things to learn. I get concerned when the presentation mode, be it in writing or in speaking, is not supplemented with the interpersonal or
Mm.
with feedback. I note some of the most impressive article writers, newsletter writers that are connected with major magazines that have been coming out during this pandemic period in particular are the ones that clearly say, I look forward to you telling me how you reacted to this, whether this made sense, who admit up front, I'm not so sure that I have all of this together. Let's see what you can understand, and we'll continue to unfold this. Again, the vulnerability factor,
Wow. Yes.
be it in writing or be it in a visual presentation, that's huge. And I think it's understandable that these are the most powerful writers that I experience right now,
Mm.
those that approach in that way.
That is beautiful. And yeah, the vulnerability, and that is the sign of a healthy organization.
Mm-hmm.
When someone can say, I'm not sure I'm doing this right, or I want to be sure that I'm communicating this properly, and you're asking for help, that I think is the sign of a very healthy, safe, appreciative work environment, regardless of where you are.
How about marketing then, Matt? When you look at marketing itself and the decision of what data will be collected and how it will be used, what do some of these aspects then mean for those that you're training or that you wish you could get your hands on?
I well, it's funny. I deal with so many organizations now. It is let's just say it is popular now to say we are a data centric organization. And I see a lot of lip service being paid to that. But ultimately, what I like to say is you're basing your marketing strategy on faith. It's apparently a religion, because while you say you are data centric, you don't like the data. And so you are continuing to do what you're doing. You're continuing to invest. I had someone on a couple months ago, and we were talking about how just different marketing strategies, and one specifically that a problem is social media. That social media has so much promise, and it's made so many claims, but it doesn't deliver when compared to other channels, when compared to other
Wow.
things. And the
Wow.
data is very clear. It's there. But yet you see departments putting so much more of the budget and personnel into social media because we have to do it. But if you're data centric, you would be seeing that there's a different story than what you believe is happening. So there's a lot of what I call the faith-based marketing initiatives going on. And despite the communication, it still happens that way. And so there's a lot of that going
Yeah.
on in marketing. And marketing is full of hopes and dreams and unicorn dust.
Mhm.
So here, I want to give you an example. I printed this off because I wanted to get your opinion on this. And by the way, I would highly recommend, Nora, to you subscribe to Bob Hoffman, Ad Contrarian.
Okay.
I love Bob's stuff. And I'm going to read to you a paragraph of one of his emails. At the annual Festival of Marketing this week, Coca-Cola marketing geniuses explained how during the pandemic, the brand became human-centric. Apparently, before the pandemic, they were duck-centric or salami-centric or something. She went on to say about consumers, we want to know what the problem is to be solved for them so that they're not compelled to move on to the next brand. Nora, this is what we deal with in marketing.
Oh my goodness. Eh, Well, and I am delighted to hear that it's not duck centric. I mean, with all due respect.
So it's like I said, it's hopes and dreams and pixie dust of, do consumers move on to the next brand story? what of our advertising is not human centric? I mean, we're coming up with more and more words and phrases that are just waiting for pins to be poked into them.
Yeah, yes,
That's
yes.
marketing.
That's marketing for you. Well, and it's interesting because any interpretive document, be it a marketing piece or writing or listening, any interpretive piece, it's certainly possible, isn't it, Matt, that the questions that are asked about that interpretive piece are bonehead questions. We don't query the folks that are taking a look at our interpretive materials in a way that provides us any real understanding. And you were mentioning about the course that you were in about how to write good instructions. Teachers that are being prepared for teaching are learning how to ask good questions so they're not just getting goofy answers that don't move education forward for even the youngest students. And that certainly sounds like that there. Thank you for sharing that, and I will definitely take a look at that.
Well, and it's because in marketing, we have created a fantasy world. And I would say, number one, about the importance of brand. And I think if the pandemic has shown anything, if the brand I usually buy isn't on the shelf, I'm going to buy another one. And guess what? I shed no tears.
Yeah.
I don't give it a second thought. And
Yes.
consumers everywhere are having those same things. And so that completely disrupts what marketers have been taught about. And I'm going to read you another Bob Hoffman quote here.
Okay.
If you want to test the thesis that we have lost touch with the real world, try this experiment. Go into any pub and explain to the assembled crowd that you work in marketing and that you are a quote unquote brand storyteller and you want to study their quote unquote customer journey.
Oh, golly.
It shouldn't take
Uh,
more than 30 seconds to get your ass handed to you.
yeah, I was actually about to hustle the person out the door and I didn't even have a beer in my hand. So, yes. Oh, my.
So this is the language that we not only deal with day in, day out. We talk about brand loyalty, brand love, joining consumers, joining the brand conversation. And it's a bunch of hot air. And this is the normal marketing language that we deal in. And yeah, 99% of it is just hot air.
It's interesting. There's a whole new and wonderful conversation, isn't there, on what happens when we're not speaking the same language at all, and yet we don't perceive it because we've gotten some of the words seem to overlap, but we're really not understanding each other. And it's fatal when it comes to the marketing experience to not speak the language of the people at all while imagining yourself as doing so. Wow.
Oh, boy, you nailed it right there. Let me write down the timestamp because that is exactly the problem is we're consumed with these brand stories and brand identity and customer journey, which it has its place. Ultimately, it has its place. But to get back to where we started, within the organization, do we understand what we're saying when we talk about this? Do we have a shared meaning of when I talk about engaging with the brand, do you think of the same thing that I'm thinking when I'm saying it? Are we
Mhm.
communicating on the right level? What is our expectation? What does that mean? And
Mhm.
that's where you can just go through any marketing document and just highlight what does that mean? What are
Does
you
that mean?
trying to say? What's the expectation you have? When you start poking holes in the language, and that's where I would say your smart organizations have gone to a very clear, focused language rather than incorporating as many popular, modern, thought leader type
Mhm.
language of because the clearer you are within your organization, to your point, the clearer you're going to be to your customer.
What does that mean? when you say that, in fact, Matt, that's exactly what it comes is what do you mean here? What does engagement mean? What does commitment mean? More, what do those phrases mean? And I suppose there are some folks that click on these phrases and to follow them, but a lot of us look at it and go, I'm not even interested in engaging, speaking of which, with those that speak that way. And an organization sets itself apart by speaking more clearly to the heart of the folks that it's trying to reach in a way that's just human to human so that they're not having the customers are not going to spend time parsing what you're trying to say.
Right, right. And I think consumers are a little smarter than brands give them give them
Hmm.
credit for, because it was very interesting because an article was written the other day that really, when you examine the behavior of a customer, they're trying to get away from advertising. They're trying to
Interesting.
eliminate it, which is why streaming services are growing so quickly. We're trying to get away from ads. And I thought about it the other day that, when I'm sitting and watching Netflix, for example, it's the one place I don't get ads in
Oh,
my life. And it's almost that safe space that I don't get that intrusion into, because that's what advertising marketing is. It's an intrusion into my life to try and get me to buy something. And so the article is very good at explaining that people are trying to unplug and resist, which is why these services are growing so quickly.
it kind of reminds me of high school. Doesn't it remind you of high school? Weren't there people that you were really glad to see in the cafeteria because you knew you were going to have a nice chat and it was going to involve you and them and you were going to talk about something that made sense and just going to have some fun for a while. And then there were others that you would like, I don't want to I don't want to sit with that person. I don't want them to find me in the afternoon and sit next to me on the bleachers because they're in their enthusiasm, and there's nothing wrong with their enthusiasm, but in their enthusiasm to want to be your friend, they're going to keep talking about stuff you're not interested in, and they're not really letting you in. It's not a partnership, it's not a friendship, it's a strain. And I'm getting a feeling for some of that happened in my history, but it's a human experience. We
Hmm.
run away from those whose goal is to only express themselves and their anxieties, and we run towards the friends with whom we are going to share, sometimes superficially and sometimes deeply, but we know that they're going to be there for whichever direction we're headed at the moment.
Yeah.
And that builds loyalty. I know what products and services and so forth that I work with that have that kind of feel in my life.
Hmm. Well, I've got one more thing I'm gonna share with you, and it was an article actually I just read yesterday, and I said I've got to remember to talk to you about that. But it was an article about what brands can do to, and of course it was a totally clickbait headline. The one thing brands need to eliminate. And of course, I'm like,
You clicked
okay,
it.
all right, but there was enough of the of a description underneath, and what it was about was stop using the same word that everybody else is using. Stop using the same, whatever's in fashion.
Yeah.
Stop doing it. Be unique in your presentation rather than, and the best example of that was at the beginning of the pandemic, how many commercials of we're all in this together, and someone stitched together a bunch of ads from a different brands and they were all the same.
Yeah.
And I thought that was as clickbaity as the headline was. I thought it could have been a better article without the clickbaity headline. But yes, stop acting like everybody else and stop using the in vogue word, because when you're using the in vogue word, I think immediately you're separating yourself from your customers,
Absolutely.
because it's what everyone else says this word is important. Do your customers understand that?
Matt, you hearken back to something that happened to me when I was first presenting in the sales area that I was working in with the educational publishing. And I remember a very surprising experience of a supervisor taking me to one side and literally letting me watch the presentations from the competitors from the point of making
Hmm.
this item. She said, what made the difference was you didn't say the same thing that everybody else was saying. They were all saying the same thing. They all acted the same way. It felt the same way. When you do something different, where I was coming from was an authentic, and this is why I want to reflect on this with you, an authentic personal experience with what I was talking about. So I was speaking from my heart, using words that my audience understood with a sincere interest in the audience understanding what I was saying so that they could ask me the questions that would most then lead them to come to the conclusion that they wanted to give what I was sharing a try.
Hmm.
Not that I was going to make them do anything, but that they were going to discern based on the authenticity of my language and my understanding, my word choice, my whole linguistic and metalinguistic behavior, if you will, that they themselves were now going to take the action of taking time to ponder whether or not this was important to them. And it usually was, because having taken time, as it were, for me to negotiate my meaning inside myself, I wasn't in a rush. I
Mm-hmm.
knew what I wanted to say. And I think that's a really important thing for all people, but especially for marketers, marketing groups, but marketing individuals as well. Take the time to talk to yourself. Do you know what you're talking about? Does this matter to you? Would you buy it from yourself?
What's the danger of using these buzzwords? I, I think sometimes people find a safety in buzzwords because
Yes.
everyone else is using it. It's the popular thing to do. But what does that do to a hearer when you hear buzzwords being used in a presentation?
I believe I might articulate it in a different way than many that you might ask, but what I know is true is I hear fear.
Mm,
And if I
wow.
hear fear, then I know that the person that's presenting is not confident. They're making this up. They're maybe doing their best, but down deep, if I decide to not use the product, they may lose their job or something like that. But the product itself or the experience itself is not down deep in what they care about. They're afraid of just expressing something that would be understandable because I might start, you mentioned this earlier, I might start asking questions that they're not ready to answer. They might
Mm.
stumble. They might not look strong in front of me, however that's defined to be by themselves or their manager.
Absolutely.
I smell fear.
Wow. And that wow, I like that observation because I even think about it from the standpoint of and a lot of this, we I think we see this a lot, especially now. People are making fun of the like the socially inclusive language.
Mm,
If you want to make someone's eyes roll, use as many terms and buzzwords that are used. Now, they mean something, but because they have been taken over with the corporate marketing and it means the more words you use, the more people I think they get that eye roll that you're just parroting what's
yes.
popular and trying to convince me that you're on board with it. And not only that, that you know more about it than I do. because and
Yeah.
I it hits that because you're not presenting an authentic message. You're
Mhm.
parroting the buzzwords that you think I'm going to respond to.
It means you haven't spent the time to discern.
Wow.
It means you haven't provided the value that I deserve. And there's another aspect, Matt, I think I would bring up is you honor me so little that you have spent no time whatsoever making sure that you understand the message that you're providing in a way that is true and deep. You have that little respect for me? Really?
Mm, wow.
And
Wow.
that's what language does to each other. What we do each other with language, I should say more clearly, is we demonstrate respect for one another. And jargon is not respectful.
Wow. I love that. That is so good. I yeah, jargon again because it's one of those we don't have a negotiation of meaning about the jargon. It is intended to mean something
Mm-hmm.
but carries little shared meaning.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's an escape hatch for a lot of people to rely on this like a crutch.
Yeah.
And because it's going to make me look smart, it's going to make me look inclusive, it's going to make me look like I have done my homework when in reality you have not.
Yeah.
You have not taken the time to really think about who you are presenting this to and their intelligence and understanding what you're trying to say. And so absolutely it can be a demeaning. It's I've heard this before. It's you're taking a stick and beating them over the head with your message
Mm-hmm.
rather than presenting a nuanced message that allows someone to I think we should do maybe a follow-up on encoding and decoding. I think that would be a fascinating
That would be
uh,
fascinating
yeah,
indeed.
afterwards because Nora, I have kept you so long here. I I so appreciate your patience and indulging me with this exploration of language.
I consider it not a bit of indulgence, but an absolute joy. This is always like a party for me to be able to talk with you. I get so much insight into what it is that you are doing in the world and the nature of how we are talking to each other, specifically in the area of marketing. So, Matt, it's always a fantastic pleasure.
Uh, Thank you so much, Nora. And Nora, you mentioned your podcast a couple of times. If you could just tell people where they can find you in your podcast, please.
Thank you, Matt. Yes, it's called It's About Language with Norah Jones, and it's found on all the places that podcasts can be found, Apple, Spotify, etc. And I do invite people to take a look. I have uh, 50 episodes up, and the 2022 starting a brand new batch of taking a look at how language works in life, learning, careers, the world and for the better, I hope, and that is my goal. So thank you very much, Matt, for allowing me to share that with folks. I hope they will give it a listen and to listen to your episode from last year
Yeah.
to get a background for the excitement that we've experienced today.
Wow. Thank you so much, Nora. And beautiful as always, thank you for sharing today. And listener, I hope this has been a treat for you. I know it's typically a little longer than some of our episodes, but again, this is what the Endless Coffee Cup's all about, is sitting here with a cup of coffee and really exploring. And I hope you enjoyed our indulgence into the negotiation of meaning today. Hey, if you enjoyed this episode, please share it with someone, review it, and let us know what you think. Again, dear listener, thanks for being with us, and I look forward to seeing you again on the next episode of the Endless Coffee Cup. You've been listening to the Endless Coffee Cup. If you enjoyed this episode, share it with somebody else, and of course, please take just a moment and rate or review us at your favorite podcast service. If you need more information, contact me at sitelogicmarketing.com. Thanks again for being such a great listener.